There we go. All right. So, good evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Tacoma-Pierce County and our co-sponsors, welcome to this forum for candidates for Washington State House positions 1 and 2 for Legislative District 27. Thank you to the candidates and to the audience for taking time to participate in this forum. My name is Liz Knox, and I will be the moderator for this forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization whose mission for the past 102 years has been to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We conduct candidate forums in order to provide voters with information on which to base their votes. This forum is for the primary election, which is August 2nd. Forums for this election are held only for races in which there are 3 or more candidates. When the league holds a forum, all candidates are invited. With us at this forum in ballot order are Todd Brisky, Jake Fye, and Thavel Patel for position 2. The other candidates, Lori Jenkins, Jelani Gibbons-Jackson, and Janet Large, are not attending. Ground rules have been sent in advance to the candidates.
Lori Jenkins
just came. Lori Jenkins just came. Okay, so backing up in ballot order, we have Todd Brisky and Lori Jenkins for position 1, and Jake Fye and Thavel Patel for position 2. The other candidates, Jelani Gibbons-Jackson and Janet Large, are not attending. Ground rules have been sent in advance to the candidates. Candidates, do you each agree to follow the ground rules, including agreeing to those regarding any recording of this forum, and to speak only to the issues, not about each other? Please indicate your agreement with a nod or a thumbs up. Thank you. Our timekeeper is Terry Baker. She will hold up cards to let you know when you have 60 seconds remaining, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and when it is time to stop. When you see the card, you may finish a short sentence. Please stay on gallery view so that you can see the timekeeper. Also, please mute yourself when it is not your turn to speak. Each candidate has up to 2 minutes for an opening statement. These will be given in ballot order, and after that, the order of answering questions will rotate, typically with 60 seconds for each candidate, but that may be longer in some cases. Each candidate will get the same amount of time to answer in every case. At the end, closing statements may be up to 1 minute and will be given in reverse order of the opening statements. If you have a question for these candidates, please text the question to, let me get it in the view. Well, I can't seem to get it so that it's clear, so I will read it to you twice. 253-948-6029. Again, 253-948-6029. Depending on the number of questions submitted, we may not be able to get to them all. The order of the opening 2-minute statements is in ballot order, so we will begin with Todd Brisky.
Hello, my name is Todd Brisky. I'm a lifelong Tacoma resident. I was born just down the street in Tacoma General Hospital. I graduated from Franklin-Pierce High School. Then I went to Pierce College and got my computer science degree from UW-T. Living in the Lincoln District, I see the homelessness, I see the broken car windows, I hear the gunshots. If elected, I know that the votes I cast, if they raise the crime rates or plunge us into a recession, I will not be immune from these effects. My top priorities are the economy, fighting both supply chain and energy inflation, the environment, ensuring that Washington State continues to keep cheap electric prices and using reliable and clean energy, homelessness, ensuring that we have adequate shelter and hospital space so that nobody has to sleep on the streets. Some priorities that don't get talked about very much that I'm very partial to, ranked choice voting. I think it's the best possible way to get a broad consensus for our elected officials. The right to repair, just like with cars, we should be the ones who choose how to repair our equipment rather than letting the vendor decide for us. Emergency power reform, because there needs to be a democratic check and balance to all executive power. I chose the Forward Party as my party preference because I don't believe it's the left versus the right anymore. I believe it's the top versus the bottom. I want to work with both sides of the aisle so that all Washingtonians can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Jenkins.
Thank you, Liz, and it's good to meet Todd. We haven't had a chance to meet in person yet, so it's good to meet you, Mr. Brisky. My name is Lori Jenkins. I have served the 27th Legislative District since 2011 when I was first elected, and 3 years ago, I was elected Speaker of the House. 1 week, 7 days after I was elected Speaker of the House, the first case of coronavirus in the nation was diagnosed here in Kirkland. And I would say that's marked my entire speakership so far. I'm proud of the work that Washington has done to save lives and to try and make sure that we help people who go into difficult economic situations here in the state and come out in much worse shape. And we made a real point in these last couple of years to make investments so that people don't come out of it in worse shape. And that's why my priorities are really kind of in 4 areas that I have really focused on and that the House of Representatives has been focusing on. The first is improving the economic well-being of Washingtonians, and hopefully we'll get some questions about this and I can talk about the things that we've done during this last couple of years. The second is making sure that the services that Washington provides are more easily accessible to people in this state. Third priority is addressing racial justice and equity. And the fourth is to address climate change. We've made huge advancements in these 4 areas over the last couple of years, but there is still so much more work to do. And Mr. Brisky kind of raised areas that we need to do that work in helping unhoused people, in behavioral health issues, in housing generally. So I'll be excited to get the questions that you all have. I've been honored to serve, and I hope to continue to serve the 27th District.
Thank you. Jake Fight.
Thank you very much, Liz and Terry and all the folks from the League of Women Voters for the constant work that you do to make sure that we have the opportunities for the public to be educated about the candidates that will serve them, whether it's at the state or the local or at the congressional level. I appreciate the work that you do, and thank you for putting on this forum. So I've had the opportunity to be in the legislature from 2013 until now, serving alongside Representative Jenkins, Speaker Jenkins, and formerly Senator Darneal, and now Senator Trudeau. So I'm born and raised in Port Angeles. I've spent my whole life in the Northwest. I've lived in Tacoma for over 40 years, and I had the opportunity to serve much of this legislative district for 7 years as their city council member. When you go in the legislature, it helps sometimes to focus. Obviously, the speaker has a wide breadth of responsibilities. Mine have really focused on environment, climate, and then as chair of the House Transportation, having a transportation system that works for everyone. So while there's a lot of things that we do together in the legislature, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that I'm most proud of, is that we passed, I think, an outstanding transportation package this last year with support from our leadership, including the speaker. And we advanced a balanced transportation system, one that deals with not only roads, but also active transportation and transit, and that deals with our climate challenges. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and the questions. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. And Dhaval Patel.
Hi, all. Once again, my name is Dhaval Patel. I use he, him, his pronouns. Thank you so much for having me today. The reason why I'm running for office really is because I want to do good. I want to do good by the people in our community, do good by our environment, do good by the indigenous peoples whose lands that we are currently occupying. I'm not a Tacoma native. I moved to Tacoma in 2019, specifically into the Parkland neighborhood. As part of a position that I got with Pacific Lutheran University, I had the opportunity to work and live on the campus for a few years. And then as I got promoted, I transitioned out and into living in central Tacoma. When it comes to what I really want to do within this position, if I was elected, one of my top priorities is education. I'm an educator at heart, working in higher education. I have a fiance who's a first grade teacher. And so from K through 16, really, and even into graduate programs, making education affordable, accessible, is a big part of what I want to do. Other topics that I've seen, I think the affordable housing is a big issue here in Tacoma, especially as I transitioned off of living off campus with getting free housing. Me and my fiance had a lot of conversations about what was affordable for us, and it was a struggle for us to find a place to call home with where rent prices are. And I know the struggle it is, and the conversations we have about being able to afford a house one day. And so I want to help with that cost of living and for people to feel like they can thrive here in Tacoma. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we've come to our questions. Each candidate will usually have up to 1 minute to answer a question, but the first question is for 90 seconds. And we'll start with Lori Jenkins. The question is, what do you see as the most important issues for the 27th district at this time, and how will you address those issues?
You know, I think there's a number of huge issues, Liz. Thanks for the question. I think that this goes back to our priorities. I think fundamentally economic well-being for people in this district and in this state is really important. That's why we've made so many targeted investments, whether it's the working families tax credit that we passed a couple of years ago, or the big B&O tax reduction that we provided for our small business community to try and help our small business community come out of the pandemic strongly. Health issues related to the pandemic, and making sure that we again kind of remake ourselves after the devastation of the pandemic is going to be very important. We're going to have to do that both economically and health-wise. I also want to say that I think it's very important to people in this district, and I won't be able to talk about all the ways that we can address this, but behavioral health, people who are unhoused, getting folks housing and jobs is really important. Addressing the racial inequities that we have in our community and across the state, and climate change. We can see this across the world right now, not just in our district, that it's killing people. And if we don't really continue to dig in like we have been, we're going to be in a much worse position, and our kids are going to be in an even worse position.
Thank you. And Jake Fye, the same question, the most important issues for the 27th legislative district.
Yeah, so I think the 27th is like many districts across the state. I think the issues are very common. I think the housing crisis has been more difficult in Tacoma in this district, largely because of the impact of increased housing prices in the north of us and bringing those housing prices increases down here to Tacoma as people seek affordable housing. And it's sort of a layered kind of situation where one place affects another one. I think we've been greatly affected on the housing, and it's really, truly a sad situation for many people. I've had the opportunity to talk with some people who have been priced out of their senior housing with rate increases on the order of 75%. That is just so wrong. People who don't have an ability to make a move very easily and don't have a lot of choices. We have to do something more dramatic in the housing space in order to make it possible for people to have a place and stay there and afford it. In addition, I would say we have to address climate, and we have to make sure that what we leave in terms of a legacy is something that's going to be sustainable, and that starts at home with local actions in each community.
Thank you. And Thavel Patel.
Yeah, so kind of agree with everyone. I think that housing is really right now the most top priority, especially when I think about our unhoused population. Now, I think it goes a little bit deeper with just, finding affordable housing. I think the access to resources, whether it be mental health care, physical health care, there's so many layered effects to it that we can't just say like, okay, here's housing, you're good to go. Like, we need to continue to provide these services to help people really get back up on their feet. I think other issues that's affecting this district is climate change. Definitely, I think being close proximity to water, we really need to think about how pollution is affecting us and our drinking water especially, and making sure that there are proper regulations that affect a lot of folks, because when we get water, we know that access to clean water can cause a lot of good health effects, whereas access to polluted water is really going to hurt a lot of folks. And I'll take my time there.
Thank you. And Todd Brisky, same question.
So in this district specifically, we have seen all the people coming down from Seattle, driving up the home prices, all that kind of stuff. I bought my house back in 2019, and as a median wage earner, it was still tough, real tough. And this is something that's super common for my generation now. We've kind of been boxed out of the best way for the middle income, middle class person to build wealth, generational wealth. And now with the home prices gone way higher than what they were already at when I bought this house, I couldn't afford it anymore. Between the house prices and now the interest rates that we're trying to do in order to fix inflation, like, I could not buy my own house. And so building starter homes for the younger generation, making sure, because like the permit process and the ecological surveys and whatnot, flat fees, make it so that builders can't make enough profit with the starter homes, so they end up building mid-tier or luxury houses, boxing the younger generation completely out of the market. And that's something I want to fix.
Thank you. Answers for the remaining questions will be for 1 minute. And this next question will start with Jake Fye. As a legislator, how would you balance the interest of your district versus needs in other areas of the county and the state if the needs or issues are different in those areas?
Well, thank you for the question. That's exactly what I had to do this last year with the legislation we passed to upgrade all of our transportation systems, because not only does the improvements that we will make to the Port of Tacoma is important, but it's also important for our agriculture in Eastern Washington to be able to get their goods to the export market that the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Seattle serve. So you have to have a balanced approach, and you need to be able to understand the interconnections of different communities. We have had a situation where a lot of employment has been going north from Tacoma. That probably is down a bit because of the pandemic, but it has to work for everybody in the state of Washington because we are so interconnected with particularly our freight, but also our other ability for people to get to work from one locale to the next.
Thank you. Dhaval Patel, same question.
Yeah, I think the balance really does come from understanding that we're in a very interesting district that because we're really in the heart of Tacoma, we're interconnected with the whole state, within the state, the county. And so we really have to think about, as legislators, how this affects our constituents, but also thinking about that larger picture of it might not look like it directly affects our constituents, but what are those after effects? What are those ripple effects? Because getting like the Port of Tacoma updated to help out Eastern Washington does help us because it helps drive jobs into our city. And thinking large scale, and I think along with that balancing comes with the fact that, like me personally, not running under a political party, willing to talk to folks and understand how others' needs affect ours too.
Thank you. Todd Brisky.
Mine is a philosophy of absolute fairness. I know there's always going to be give and take whenever dealing with folks from different districts and whatnot. And I'm all about coming to a compromise, trying to figure out, okay, this is fair for me. Is that fair for you? Is there something I can do to help you out with this by giving a little over here? So I'm all about trying to come up and figure out what is fair for everybody involved, not just using the economic might of our city and our port and stuff to try to hold it over Eastern Washington's head or something like that. I want all of Washington to do well.
And Lori Jenkins.
Yeah, I think that, we've done this a lot in the legislature, balance these things. And now being in the speaker's role, this is, I have to do this more than I ever have before. But I'm always the representative from the 27th district first. That is very important. But I think what many others have answered is very true. We are all more connected now than we ever have been. But let me just give you a couple of examples of how I think Jake and I have both worked together on things. One is related to, for a long time, we had a county council that wouldn't do a 0.1% behavioral health tax. And so when we had other places in the state that would do that tax and get money for mental health and we couldn't get it, we then started to look at what cities might do that and ask for amendments to the bill to allow the city of Tacoma to do it. Our county has now done that, but it's working with people. And the other thing was like on Highway 167, Jake was a major part of that. And that was the #1 priority for the rest of the state, in addition to us.
Thank you.
And so working together on those things help make that happen.
We're out of time. Thank you. Our next question, Dhaval Patel will go first. How would you respond to someone who does not support the current Washington state system for mail-in voting and wants to return to physical polling places?
As far as how I respond, I would want to know more about where their issue with this is. Is it a partisan issue? Is it not trusting the system? Is it that there's an inability for them to access the mail-in system for whatever reason? I think like when it comes to this, coming from states that didn't have a full mail-in system, I think this is a blessing. My ability to be able to go get my ballot, be able to vote, have something that shows me exactly where I can go and drop it off, I think has been immensely beneficial. And so to me, it's talking to people, understanding what that issue is, and helping them see the goodness that comes from the mail-in system.
Thank you. Todd Brisky.
I absolutely love my absentee ballot. I'm 42 years old and I've never voted in a polling place in my life. I went there with my parents when I was a little kid, whatnot, but it takes me hours and hours and hours to vote, like sitting down with my ballot, reading through the candidate statements, watching forums like this, going to each candidate's social media, kind of seeing what they're talking about and whatnot. Is there improvements that can be done? Yes, of course. We could do simple things like at the drop boxes, if we had some volunteers checking voter ID, we could absolutely do that. Wouldn't add any time whatsoever to the actual thing. And for those who can't afford ID, we can provide it to them, which would actually be a net benefit to them because then they'd be able to use that ID wherever they need to in their daily lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Jenkins.
I have a little bit of this problem in my house. My wife would like us to all be voting at polling places, and for good reason. I liked it too. I'll never forget standing in line to vote for Barack Obama for president and the amazing conversations with people. But being able to vote by mail is very important for voter turnout, for access, for all those things. I agree that when I talk to people who may be opposed to the vote by mail system or have questions about it, really understanding the questions and trying to address them is important. Although I would say with all of the disinformation out there, it can be very challenging to have those conversations. But I just came back from my home state of Wisconsin, where they've removed all of the drop boxes in the state. It has suppressed voting horribly in that state, and that is not something we want to go back to. We want everyone to have access to democracy and to the vote in Washington.
Thank you. And Jake Fye.
Thank you for the question. So these forums are great because I'll say that I think Mr. Patel was right on in stating that is to understand why people have the concern that they do, and to help them understand how the system works. They still may end up at the end of the day still in their same position. And maybe not a good position for them, maybe for reasons that we might disagree with. But I think the important thing is to understand where people come from and what their concerns are, because I think our democracy is under challenge. And I think that people have less confidence now than they've had in the past. And that's a lot about disinformation. So I think it's our obligation to make sure we understand and try to provide information so that people understand why we get better participation in our current system that we didn't get by voting at the ballot box.
Thank you. Our next question, Todd Brisky will go first. And the question is, what should the legislature do to prepare the state for the next pandemic or other regional emergency?
The first thing I would like to address is emergency power reform. I always want a democratic check and balance to any executive authority. The emergency power should be used in acute, unexpected emergencies. And then once we kind of get a handle on it, the power should return to the legislature where the power belongs, because the legislature is our most democratic body. After that, we need to, one of the things I would have liked to have seen is home food deliveries for those who needed to shelter in place, like my parents in their 70s, vulnerable. being able to provide them food delivery at home would have allowed them to not have to leave and to stay safe.
Thank you. Lori Jenkins.
Thank you, Liz. I think one of the great things for Washington, the National Commonwealth Fund just came out with an analysis, and Washington State ranked 4th in the nation in terms of states, in terms of health outcomes and health systems during the pandemic. So we were very strong as a state, and that was in large part due to the fact that we acted together for the most part. I do think I work in public health in my other life, and it's really important that you do kind of an after action debrief of everything. And I think that's the first most important thing we do. And the legislature actually passed legislation to do that post-pandemic here. But I do think strengthening our local health departments, especially if you're talking about pandemics, strengthening our local health departments, which had been very weakened over the years in this state, is really important if we're going to be looking at other pandemics. Is an important thing to do. But I'm looking forward to looking at kind of the whole hot wash of everything we did and getting those recommendations and then starting to pass legislation based on those recommendations.
Thank you. Jake Fye.
Well, it's hard to follow my colleague, Speaker Jenkins, on this question, since her occupation is so much about public health. But what I would add to what she said is, years ago, there was an initiative passed that to reduce the car tabs, and a number of things suffered for that. And one of them was public health. And we never really got back and made the investments that we needed to make in public health. So that, because we shortchanged the situation for so many years, that's why it's so important that we do two things. One is to understand where our shortcomings were and improve upon them, and to provide the resources going forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again, where we have a situation where our health departments don't have the resources to be able to respond.
And Thubal Patel.
Yeah, I think when it comes to preparing for the next situation, definitely looking back and assessing how this went, knowing that we were 4th is great. But there had to have been a lot of pitfalls in getting to where we are today. And I think learning and assessing that is really important. But I also think understanding that Washington did a good job of coming together and helping each other and being able to mobilize that care, whether it is food delivery services, whether it is other ways of helping folks in the community and figuring out those types of infrastructure so we can mobilize people who are ready to help their neighbors. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. And the next question, Lori Jenkins will be first. And the question is, in the last biennium, record funding was allocated to behavioral health, including substance abuse, treatment programs, outreach, and more. What additional measures would you support to continue to address the needs of people with behavioral health issues?
Thank you for that question, Liz. This is an area that I worked a lot on before I became speaker. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is workforce. It is challenging because we haven't yet, even though we've invested a lot of money, it takes quite a significant amount of time to build the facilities that we're trying to build, but we are very much on the path to doing that. Now the issue is we have a complete workforce shortage of nurses and social workers and all kinds of behavioral health treatment providers, and it's a national shortage. So figuring out creative ways to get more people working in these fields so folks can actually get treated and get the kind of help that they need is, I think, to me, the biggest thing that we need to be working on in the next few sessions.
Thank you. And Jake Fye.
I would totally agree with the speaker on this issue. It now becomes a workforce issue. It's not the only workforce issue we have in the state of Washington. There's other areas where it's very important to redevelop our transportation system with ferry workers, for example. It's all over the place, and that's why it's so particularly important in behavioral health that we provide resources for people who otherwise might choose a different occupation to get into behavioral health. So I think money and education stipends to help facilitate that, which is already started but needs to be enhanced. And then the physical facilities for the actual, so that people can have a place where they work and patients can go and get the assistance that they need, at whatever level of struggle they have with their behavioral health.
Thank you. And Thavel Patel?
Yeah, once again, agree, workforce, but I think particularly around the idea of burnout, my role at Pacific Lutheran University, I do crisis response. I'm on an on-call rotation, and me, my colleagues on a college campus are only a microcosm of the amount of burnout there is when it comes to behavioral health issues and even mental health issues. And I think addressing the fact that folks who are doing this work do this work because they care about others, but it feels a lot of the time that no one cares for us. And we need folks to also be caring for us as we're trying to care for others. And I think, it creates this ripple effect, but we need to find a way to help folks continue to find passion and joy in helping folks.
And Todd Brisky.
Yeah, we see a big problem with a large part of the homelessness due to drug addiction, mental health issues. We need to be able to take care of that and provide the services to everybody that needs it. Workforce, definitely, not even just here, but just nurses in general. I would like to see a program where if the nurse agrees to work in Washington State for X amount of years, we just pay for their education just to try to get as many people through. As we see all the boomers start to retire, we're going to see a net negative workforce for the foreseeable future. And so this isn't going away anytime soon. And we need to deal with it as quickly as possible.
Okay, our next question, Jake Fye will go first. How will you work to enhance anti-racism both in your district and at the state level?
Well, it's a very challenging question because a lot of things are involved in this. I think we've tried hard to pass some legislation this last period of years that makes sure that the rights of everyone is protected. And whether it's related to employment or whether it's discrimination situations that come up, it's just, I think part of it has to be about education, but also has to provide for a framework so that there is not a situation where people feel, especially those people who come from different backgrounds, feel like they're not protected in their daily life, and that we're not treating them like we treat everyone else in the society. So obviously there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and that's why we've started some work in that respect, but we'll be doing more in the future.
And Thavel Patel, same question.
The words we use have power. I think a lot of the times when we throw out words like anti-racism, white privilege, these words start to get polarized, and then disinformation begins to swell from that. And I think we need to understand that we can't use this high level of jargon or lingo to really break these things down. We really need to be able to look at these different policies and procedures that we have and how are they affecting people. As a person of color myself, I see it all the time with coworkers, just out in public. A lot of it also just comes from people not willing to admit that the way they grew up or their thoughts aren't helpful, and showing them the same level of care that it takes.
And Todd Brisky.
My core philosophy is of liberalism and fairness. Liberalism, because I see all people as individuals with exactly equal rights. Fairness, because I believe in the equal application and protection of the law. If a law is not or cannot be applied universally, it needs to be fixed or repealed. One simple example of this is air fresheners dangling from your car rear view mirror. Technically illegal, but rarely enforced. Sometimes this is the backdoor reason for a cop to pull someone over that they think is suspicious or something like that. But we can't just have a lot of these laws dangling around that get to be used at the discretion of the person and aren't universally enforced.
Thank you. And Lori Jenkins.
Yeah, I mean, every law that we pass in Washington has the potential to either advance equity or harm it for the most part. So our caucus over the last 2 years has really engaged in a lot of equity education as a caucus. And out of that, we developed an equity tool where all of our committees and chairs ask questions around equity as they're considering bills, and actually are required to brief us in caucus when a bill is going to go to the floor on its impacts on equity. We've got a long way to go to perfect it, but we keep on trying to get better at it. And I want to give a tip of the hat to Jake on the transportation package. He applied a complete equity lens to the transportation package, and if you look at it thoroughly, you will see that it does address equity. Likewise, we passed the Community Reinvestment Act this year, or funded it, to look at communities who have been particularly harmed by the war on drugs and to provide some resources to those communities. So these are just examples of things that we're trying to do to move equity forward.
Thank you. And our next question, Thavel Patel will be first. What do you propose for statewide policies and strategies to address climate change?
Yeah, I think that with a lot of the types of businesses that are here in Washington, I think we need to really look at how they're polluting in particular. And we need to figure out, I don't know if there is a carbon tax in the state, but if there isn't, getting one passed, but also understanding, like, when it comes to the pollution, whether it's our water, whether it's our air, holding these corporations accountable for their actions, but also understanding when it comes to things like climate change, who they're going to affect the most is our minoritized and marginalized communities. And we need to understand how our infrastructure is built to hurt them the most, and also work to fix that.
Todd Brisky.
One thing when talking about energy policy is imperative for us to understand is that you cannot replace coal-fired plants with wind and solar. The amount of solar panels that you would need to replace a coal plant doing 1 gigawatt capacity, you need to do at least double, and you need massive batteries to hold the charge during the day to deliver it at night. This requires so much in rare earth minerals, and we just cannot build that many quickly enough. In the intermediate term, nuclear power is our best option. It can replace any kind of plant. It is safe, clean, stable. It's actually, when you compare it to like fossil fuels or hydroelectric, it's actually, safety record is much better, and we can produce it domestically.
Thank you. Lori Jenkins.
Thank you. This is an area that we have been working on deeply and will continue to work on. We do have the Climate Commitment Act here in Washington State, which will be implemented in the next year, which again requires companies to decrease their carbon output or to pay costs if they don't do that. And it's important that both that and our low carbon fuel standard be fully implemented. They are going to have the biggest impact of anything else that we do. But there are so many other things that we did this year, some work on appliance efficiency. We've begun to do a fair amount of work on building construction, both home construction and business construction, and which contributes a lot to climate issues when you start to look at it. So these are things that we're going to have to keep on working on because we don't want to increase costs while we do that. So figuring out the right balance, the Goldilocks spot there, is going to be our challenge in the next couple of years.
And Jake Fye.
I've had the advantage of working my entire work career on energy efficiency and renewable energy. And I'll say that the kilowatt hour not used is the cheapest kilowatt hour that we can find. So energy efficiency, whether it's in buildings or whether it's in appliances or whether it's in the transportation systems that we use going to electric vehicles, there's an abundance of opportunities, but it's a lot of work. And we are certainly blessed in this part of the world with our hydroelectric system that provides us affordable energy that also provides other benefits, whether it's trade or whether it is opportunities to increase our salmon production. So it's always easy to talk about building more generation. The work that has to be done first and foremost is to reduce our consumption so that we are in a position to have to build additional power plants.
Thank you. And our next question, Todd Brisky will go first. What are you willing to do to ensure Washington women have continued access to contraception and abortion? Will you vote to sustain House Bill 1851, preserving a pregnant individual's ability to access abortion care if there is an attempt to repeal it?
Yeah, I'm an old liberal from back in the day, safe, legal, and rare. I believe up till viability is a perfectly fine standard. I would love to see a constitutional amendment protecting every Washingtonian's medical privacy and bodily autonomy. I could see a scenario where Republicans take the federal House and Senate, push through some limit federally, and we need people in Washington State, when they try to come in and do something, say no. In Washington State, that's not allowed. We're doing it our way. You guys can do it your way. Thank you.
Lori Jenkins.
Luckily, women in this state have a right to choose because the voters of this state twice have said that they have a right to choose. And in 1990, one of my friends drafted Initiative 120, and that is Roe v. Wade in statute. But it is so clear that Republicans want to repeal it. They've filed over 40 bills in Washington State in the last 6 years to try and repeal a woman's right to have bodily autonomy. So there's virtually, I guess, Liz, there's virtually nothing I won't do to protect it. This has been a core value of mine since I was quite young, and something that I've worked on. I agree with Todd that we ought to try and look at a constitutional amendment, although that takes a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate. And I think Republicans ought to have to be clear about whether or not they would vote for a constitutional amendment to protect a woman's right to choose, rather than just say, well, it's protected right now, so don't worry about it, which is what they're saying. I'll work to expand and protect a women's rights, both here in Washington and across the nation, as long as I'm in office.
Jake Fye.
Well, there's no difference in my opinions from the speakers on this issue. We really have had a very unfortunate situation happen with our U.S. Supreme Court. We know how it happened now, but we have to do everything we can to protect the rights of women. and that they have the ultimate choice about what happens to their body and what reproductive decisions that they can make and not men make for them. A constitutional amendment I would be supportive of, and I think it would be important to get the Republicans to take a position on this issue. It's easy for them to say, oh, nothing more is necessary. I'd like to find out how they're going to vote on a constitutional amendment. So I very much support that. And helping other states, making our state available to help women who otherwise would not be able to get safe services.
And Thavel Patel.
Yeah, I would do everything I can to fight for a woman's protection to get an abortion. And I agree, like, yeah, we do a constitutional amendment to the Washington State Constitution would be great. And putting the feet to the fire to Republicans to say whether or not they're for or against it. But I also think, like, what's that next step following it? We can't just vilify them. We need to then work with people in parts of this state who, even if it's legal, are going to do everything, you know, whether it's at a city level, county level, to stop it. And how do we make sure that it is actually accessible across the state? It's easy for us to do here in a very blue area, but we need to be thinking about those folks out in some of our red areas.
Thank you. This will be our last question, and Lori Jenkins will go first. Given that the Washington state tax structure is the most regressive in the nation, how would you change it to make it more equitable?
Well, I mean, I was the original prime sponsor of the capital gains excise tax, and I'm very proud that we passed it 2 years ago. It's now being litigated, and the state Supreme Court will rule on that. But I do think it's constitutional. I do think it's an excise tax, and I think whatever the court rules will give us real guidance on the opportunities that we have. Because of the prior court cases on taxation, we have very few opportunities on taxes. But like, for example, this year, though, the B&O tax is very unfair to small businesses because it's a tax on the gross, because we have a Supreme Court case that says you cannot tax people or businesses on net income, right? So, so we reduced that. And we have 125,000 small businesses in Washington state that are going to either pay no B&O taxes or have a much reduced B&O tax. So these kinds of smart targeted tax improvements are what I'm looking at now.
Thank you. And Jake Fye.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't have an income tax in the state, but I think the possibility of that happening in the near term is very small, and that's why I supported the capital gains excise tax, because it has the effect of having people who are more wealthy and that make their money on some large-scale transactions pay into our system. We have probably the most regressive system in the country for tax collection, and that affects particularly people who don't have a lot of income in the state of Washington, whether they're retired or just have a hard time gaining employment. So we've got to do things that may be sort of nipping at the edges, but we've got to do whatever we can to bring our tax system into a more fair system where people pay more related to how much resources they have than our current system.
And Thavel Patel.
So full transparency, I don't really have an answer or a solution to this question, but I would follow the lead of people like Lori and Jake in these efforts to make the system more equitable. That's all.
And Todd Brisky.
Yeah, sales tax is by far the most regressive kind of tax you can have. I like the fair tax, where they deal with that by giving out prebates based on poverty level, which flattens out the curve, making it a little more fair. One thing I would like to do, seeing as how our current state budget is $144 billion for the biennium, just going back a couple years ago, 2015, it was only $80 billion. I would actually like to go back to that previous level of spending, using that extra money to give back to the people and buy every Washingtonian health insurance. This would be a direct benefit to every single Washingtonian and ensure that everybody has health insurance, which would be an immediate, huge impact on everybody's life.
Thank you. Now it's time for closing statements. Each candidate has up to 1 minute for a closing statement. We will reverse the order of the opening statements, so we will begin with Thavil Patel.
Hi, thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this forum. This was, I think, a great opportunity for me, especially as someone who's not involved in politics. And all I would really like to say is voting for me is voting for someone who cares for people and wants to do good by the folks within this district. Yeah.
And Jake Fye.
Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today. And thank you, Mr. Patel and Mr. Brisky, for joining us today. I think the opportunity for people to hear your views as well as Speaker Jenkins and mine is very important to this process. So thank you for showing up today. I've worked hard for this district. I will continue to work hard for this district. I think one of my going forward will be to make sure that I do a better job on issues that involve disadvantaged communities wherever they are in the state of Washington, to make sure that opportunities are there, but also that past practices, whether it's transportation or other environmental issues, that we actually take into account the harm that we've done and try to rectify that harm. We neglected this issue for a long, long time, and we're well past the time where we should address it more clearly. We did that in the transportation sector this last year. We need to do it everywhere else in the work that we do in the state legislature. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. And Lori Jenkins.
Thank you to everyone who's listening in on this, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for continuing to do these forums. I appreciate being able to hear different ideas and took some great notes about some of the great ideas that I heard here tonight. I'm going to take a little bit of a turn because it's 7 o'clock and I have one more meeting tonight, and I want to wish my wife a very happy 9th anniversary, since we're not able to celebrate it together because I'm doing these things. But I also want to thank the 27th Legislative District for letting my wife and I be married for 9 years. And this is one of the reasons why I love representing this district, because this district has supported me over the years and I have supported the district. And I love the 27th. I love the city of Tacoma. I love representing it. I love it when people disagree and when people agree. But what's best is the diversity of ideas that are brought to me and that hopefully I can use as a legislator to improve people's lives. So thank you so much for that opportunity.
And Todd Brisky.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been fun. Anybody watching, if you got questions for me, don't hesitate to send me an email. Also, please consider going to my website, toddbrisky.com, where I've got lots of plans, lots of proposals. I tried to well source everything that I got on there. I'd also like to ask everybody watching to consider running for office, any office. As a voter myself, I'd love to see all sorts of people running with all sorts of different collections of ideas. Feel free to email me and I can tell you about the process that I went through. It's not too bad, really. Thank you for your time and your consideration. I really do appreciate it. Thanks.
I would like to thank the candidates who joined us tonight, Todd Brisky and Lori Jenkins for position 1, and Jake Fye and Thavil Patel for position 2. Thank you also to our community co-sponsors, the Asia Pacific Cultural Center, Grid City Co-op, Latinx Unidos of the South Sound, NAACP, Summit Waller Community Association, Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium, Tacoma Urban League, Vibrant Schools, and YWCA of Pierce County. For viewers, please be sure to vote for the candidate of your choice before Election Day on August 2nd. You should have received your ballot already. Please mail or use a drop box to deliver your ballot as early as possible. Thank you also to the timekeeper, Terry Baker, and to the committee who planned this forum. Be sure to read your voter's pamphlet and look up vote411.org, where you can find answers to questions posed to the candidates. Thank you for watching and have a good evening, and don't forget to vote.